Hello and welcome back to my humble show. I have a bit of a rabbit hole to go down, so I'm going to try to dig as deep as possible, as fast and furiously as possible, without sharing too many of my own thoughts along the way, because although I have quite a bit to say, I have quite a few clips to show you, quite a few things to share with you. So let's get right into it. I'll take you through it step by step, and you can let me know what you think in the comments below. I'd be happy to hear from you. Even if you disagree with me, as long as you like, subscribe, and enjoy the ride. So, make that happen. Original Sin, as seen on the screen. A book by Jake Tapper and Alex Thompson. I'll be focusing more so on Jake Tapper because of his interesting correlation with Joe Biden, whom this book is about. So yes, Original Sin, President Biden's decline, its cover-up, and his disastrous choice to run again. Strong words. And you'll be able to read it for yourself, if you're interested, as of May 20, via Penguin Press. So yes, this was posted by Jake Tapper himself. He said in his caption, Original Sin, now available for pre-order at originalsinbook.com from Penguin Press. Been working hard on this with Alex Thompson. From interviews with more than 200 White House insiders, whom you apparently couldn't get the inside scoop from a year plus ago. But yeah, interviews with more than 200 White House insiders, dim leaders, and more. Hashtag Original Sin Book. Let me read this one more time. President Biden's decline, its cover-up, and his disastrous choice to run again. Where were you, Jake Tapper? Alright, so the first thing I had to say about this, oh look, Jake Tapper is now trying to make money off of a reality which he himself had previously claimed was a figment of our imaginations. Would you buy the book from him? Would you gift him that money? Would you grant him that satisfaction? Feeling like he's on the right side of history on this one? After he himself played quite a role in the cover-up, as you will see momentarily. If anyone has absolutely no standing, it's Jake Tapper. Here he was not too long ago blasting Lara Trump for saying then what he's saying now.
How do you think it makes little kids with stutters feel when they see you make a comment like that?
First and foremost, I had no idea that Joe Biden ever suffered from a stutter. I think what we see on stage with Joe Biden, Jake, is very clearly a cognitive decline.
Okay.
That's what I'm referring to. It makes me uncomfortable
You have
to watch somebody on stage search for
that's so amazing.
questions
It's so amazing to me
and try and figure out an answer.
A cognitive decline.
Well, when you're trying to tell me that what I was suggesting was
I think that you were
stuttering,
mocking his stutter.
Idea, Joe Biden.
Yeah, I think you were mocking his stutter, and I think you have absolutely no standing to diagnose somebody's cognitive decline. I would think that somebody in the Trump family would be more sensitive to people who do not have medical licenses diagnosing politicians from afar. Plenty of people have diagnosed your father from afar.
Okay. Not quite the end of the clip, but I'm going to back it up and react to it along the way. I have a few things to say. I'll try to keep it short, try to keep it simple. But there's so much going on there. And this was not too long ago, before the disastrous debate performance by Biden, which ultimately caused him to drop out. I won't say it cost him the election because he was likely going to lose anyways, but definitely was the milestone in the worst possible sense for Biden. Best possible sense for the rest of us because, hey, now we actually get some honesty from journalists, so-called journalists, like Jake Tapper, who was tap dancing around the truth back then. In fact, he was outright denying it, pretending that you were just making fun of an old man's stutter. If you accused him of cognitive decline, which, of course, Jake Tapper himself is now admitting and publishing a book about. Go figure.
How do you think it makes little kids with stutters feel?
Straight out of the gate. How do you think it makes little kids with stutters feel? How do you win an argument against someone who just throws little kids in there like that? Like, you know you're insulting the little kids right now. Don't you? Don't you? So, he projects, first and foremost. That's how you win an argument. So, well done on that account, Jake Tapper. It's like, how long ago did you start beating your wife? That sort of thing. Because you're implying they've done it. And once it's out there, what can they do about it? It's like an allegation, a false allegation. It may be false, it may be proven false, but it still has done some damage. It's called defamation. So yes, he makes that projection. Maybe he's trying to make an honest connection. I have a hard time giving him that benefit of the doubt.
How do you think it makes little kids with stutters feel when they see you make a comment like that?
First and foremost, I had no idea that Joe Biden ever suffered from a stutter. I think what we see on stage with Joe Biden...
And by the way, nobody would know that Joe Biden had a stutter if not for Joe Biden's campaign and the Democrat Party telling us ad nauseum that he had a stutter. Starting around 2020, when he ran for president against Donald Trump the first time. Yeah, they made an ad campaign out of it. And during that time, Joe Biden himself actually said that he didn't believe he had a stutter any longer. He said that his mistakes were not due to a stutter. I'll show you that clip in a little while if you stick around and find out. Joe Biden said that he was not dealing with his childhood stutter any longer. So if you want to say that now accusing Joe Biden of declining cognitively is insulting children because Joe Biden had a stutter when he was a child, that doesn't make a lot of sense. If you want to say that Joe Biden has a stutter now and therefore it's insulting to accuse him of declining cognitively, you should really take into consideration the fact that Joe Biden said in 2019 that he wasn't dealing with a stutter. That it was gone, and that his mistakes were just mistakes. And yet, Jake Tapper is here pearl clutching for a politician.
Is very clearly a cognitive decline.
Okay.
That's what I'm referring to. It makes me uncomfortable.
You are
to
no
watch somebody on stage
That's so amazing. It's so amazing to me.
Yeah, it's so amazing to me too that you could be so conclusively counterintuitive not so long ago. And now you're turning around and selling a book claiming to be exposing the truth. And we'll read more of the draft on that book, okay? Because you go to the website and there's some more verbiage about it. Completely the opposite of what he was saying in this interview, where he was completely dismissing what Laura Trump was saying. And one more point about Joe Biden's so-called stutter. Where was it for the entirety of his life? I guess it was just a childhood stutter that went away. Clearly, through all of his Senate years in which you could not locate a stutter because he spoke maybe stupidly, but fluently. Probably even more fluently than me. And then lo and behold, old age rolls around, then the stutter is back right when it's politically convenient for him to run on. Or at least for his party and his campaign to run on. It was just stapled to Joe Biden's forehead, basically. Like, this man has a stutter. You're insulting children. If you say anything about a decline, what decline? There is no decline. Vote for him.
And try and figure out an answer.
A cognitive decline.
Well, when you're trying to tell me that what I was suggesting was
I think that you were
stuttering,
mocking his stutter.
Idea, Joe Biden.
Yeah, I think you were mocking his stutter.
Mocking his stutter. So even if Joe Biden had a stutter when he was a child, and it went away for, 60 years, and then came back during his old age. That could still suggest some cognitive decline, could it not?
I think you have absolutely no standing to diagnose somebody's cognitive decline. I would think that somebody in the Trump family would be more sensitive to people who do not have medical licenses.
So then he turns around and takes a shot at Trump. That's what he's doing there. He works on a network that does nothing but take shots at Trump. They have for years. And he stuck by for all of that. He wasn't sitting there with his other colleagues condemning them for making assessments about Donald Trump's mental, physical, whatever state. And he even deflects to that here. He, on the one hand, is scolding Laura Trump for assessing Joe Biden while he's simultaneously semi-assessing Donald Trump. And if not here, well, he has in many other interviews, many other segments. So many examples of him being a hypocrite all wrapped up into one.
Diagnosing politicians from afar. Plenty of people have diagnosed your father from afar, and I'm sure it offends you. Your father-in-law from afar, I'm sure it offends you.
Oh, so is it offensive? Because if so, and you actually keep that same energy, then you should have been condemning everyone else on your network who was making similar assessments against Donald Trump. Right? Funny how he makes that comparison just to deflect. Not that he cares if anyone in the Trump family is offended. He's literally just saying that to try to gaslight her.
You don't have any standing to say.
I'm not diagnosing him. What I'm saying, Jake,
you just talked
is
about
that
a cognitive
we can
decline.
See that Joe Biden
I have one last
struggling
question for you, Laura. You can't
times on stage, and it's very concerning to a lot of people that this could be the leader of the free world.
Okay.
That is all I'm saying. I genuinely feel
Laura
sorry
Trump.
for Joe Biden.
I appreciate it. I'm sure.
He's so dismissive. Okay. Thank you, Laura Trump. Whatever you say. Go away now. I won. This is my show. I call the shots here. You can question one, but not the other. Who are you, anyways? You know nothing. Well, according to your own example about how people go after Donald Trump and how she must be offended about that, she's like the perfect person since she has personal experience, familial experience with people insulting, in her case, her father-in-law. Sounds like she might be the person to speak on this, right? But he wasn't having any of it. Now he's saying the exact opposite, of course, and he expects us to believe that he's as compelling now as he was then, except he's just not compelling. So Alex Thompson, the other name on that book cover, also posted about it, saying, "News. Jake Tapper and I wrote a book, and I'm proud of it. It's about Biden's decline, its cover-up, and how it allowed Trump to return. Though he ultimately did not pull off much of a return. And Democrats didn't get much of a return on their investment, either in him or Kamala Harris. Pre-orders are really important these days, so I'd be grateful if you ordered early, like right now. Do it. OriginalSinBook.com. Yeah. So I said, Alex Thompson says he's proud of the book, but unless there's a chapter about how Jake Tapper literally participated in the cover-up of Joe Biden's decline, it's not worth our time. All right, a quote from the website. Now the full, unsettling truth is being told for the first time. That's a quote. Jake Tapper could have started telling the truth a lot sooner. It was obvious to anyone not blinded by agenda. So rather than reading this screenshot, which I took, I'll go ahead and pull up the website and read from it. Hopefully it's not too much. By the way, Jake Tapper, wrote the best-selling nonfiction book, The Outpost, an untold story of American valor, which was turned into a critically acclaimed film in 2020, and 2 New York Times best-selling novels, The Hellfire Club and The Devil May Dance. He is an Emmy award-winning TV journalist as lead DC anchor and chief Washington correspondent for CNN, a Dartmouth graduate and Philly native. He lives in Washington, D.C. with his wife, daughter, son, 3 dogs, and a cat. Alex Thompson is a national political correspondent for Axios. And I'm just now realizing that when Joe Biden, back in 2019, said that his mistakes were not due to a stutter, he was being interviewed by Axios. I'm not sure the name of the person who was interviewing him, so I won't guess that it was Alex Thompson, but still, Alex Thompson, political correspondent for Axios and a CNN contributor. Before that, he created Politico's West Wing Playbook newsletter and worked at the New York Times and Vice News. A Harvard graduate, he lives in Washington, D.C. He has no pets, but is a proud uncle. Good for him. There they are, looking very AI generated. Just saying. So, from 2 of America's most respected journalists. Really? I'm not getting that vibe from Jake Tapper. An unflinching and explosive reckoning with one of the most fateful decisions in American political history. Joe Biden's run for re-election despite evidence of his serious decline. Really? Evidence of his serious decline? Evidence which you ignored at the time? Amid desperate efforts to hide the extent of that deterioration. Very, very preposterous. About the book. In Greek tragedy, the protagonist's efforts to avoid his fate is what seals his fate. In 2024, American politics became a Greek tragedy. Joe Biden launched his successful 2020 bid for the White House with the stated goal of saving the nation from a second Trump presidential term. He, his family, and his senior aides were so convinced that only he could beat Trump again, they lied to themselves, allies, and the public about his condition and limitations. At his debate with Trump on June 27 of 2024, the consequences of that deception were exposed to the world. It was shocking and upsetting. Yeah, if you were living with blinders over your eyes because of your bias, the only thing that was shocking to you guys in that moment during the debate was that that's when you finally realized that your guy was definitely going to lose the election. That's what was shocking about it for you. That's why immediately everyone was chitter-chatting behind the scenes about what they were going to do next. In other words, how they were going to replace Joe Biden. It wasn't really about shock about Joe Biden's decline. No. It was the shock of the impending loss, which came to fruition anyways because of so many sorts of denial within the Democrat Party. Now the full unsettling truth is being told for the first time. Jake Tapper and Alex Thompson take us behind closed doors into private conversations between the heaviest of hitters, revealing how big the problem was and how many people knew about it. From White House staffers at the highest to lowest levels, to leaders of Congress and the cabinet, from governors to donors and Hollywood players. One particular comes to mind. The truth is finally being told. What will you learn, or what you will learn, makes President Biden's decision to run for re-election seem shockingly narcissistic. That's quite an assessment. I feel like that's even more offensive than cognitive decline, right? Cognitive decline is much more natural and understandable than narcissistic. But that's what Jake Tapper is co-signing now that Joe Biden was narcissistic, self-delusional, and reckless. A desperate bet that went bust. In part of a larger act of extended public deception that has few precedents. The story the authors tell raises fundamental issues of accountability and responsibility that will continue for decades. The irony is biting. In the name of defeating what they called an existential threat to democracy, Biden and his inner circle ensured it, tossing aside his implicit promise to serve only for one term. He didn't actually promise that. He never promised to serve only for one term. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I don't believe he ever promised that. So they're still telling lies even here, but they're in the opposite direction now. Okay, and by the way, if Joe Biden had promised to serve only for one term, shouldn't you have called him out for lying the moment he jumped back into the race for the re-election? Wouldn't that be him lying? But I guess, defending Joe Biden at least a little bit, because I don't think he ever really promised implicitly that he was only going to serve for one term. He may have led some people to believe that, but I don't know that he ever really promised that. I remember hearing him say, we'll see what happens, or, no, I'm not saying that I won't run for a second term. But denying the existential or existence of health issues the nation had been watching for years, dooming the Democrats to defeat. So the nation had been watching this for years. Wait, so on the one hand, the nation had been watching his decline for years. And on the other hand, what happened in the debate was a shock because no one expected it. These people, my word, they're shocking and awing me as I'm reading this. And I'm spending way much more time on this. Sorry for the poor phrasing, but shock and awe. Denying the existence of health issues the nation had been watching for years, dooming the Democrats to defeat. The decision to run again, the original sin of this president, led to a campaign of denial and gaslighting by literally you, leading directly to Donald Trump's return to power and all that has happened as a consequence. Rarely does hubris meet nemesis more explosively. Wherever you stand on the political spectrum, original sin is essential reading. Whatever gets you a bag, I guess. Okay. Back on track here. See if I can move this along. Laura Trump had her I told you so moment last year after Joe Biden crumbled in the presidential debate, which Jake Tapper so happened to be moderating. And at the time, I said, Jake Tapper has the potential to be a good moderator. And he actually was in that debate. He was fair. He was square. But overall, just another propagandist out there, as we can clearly see. So this was Laura Trump after that debate, reposting that clip of her on CNN being interviewed, being grilled by Jake Tapper. She said, "Seems like a good time to remind everyone that in 2020, Jake Tapper first accused me of making fun of people with a stutter. An atrocious accusation, especially if she didn't even know anything about him having a stutter, since nobody was talking about it for years, for most of his life, because, hey, it was not noticeable to anyone. And then attempted to shut me down and ended our interview when I tried to warn people of Joe Biden's very obvious cognitive issues. Fun thing to keep in mind for the debate tonight." So actually, that is even more interesting. I may have misread this before. She actually posted this before the debate. And then, like clockwork, she turned out to be so right on account of Joe Biden's crumbling. Jake Tapper Well, yeah, now saying what she was saying then. Can't make this stuff up. So let me just go ahead and play the very beginning of this because it's the same clip I showed you earlier, but it's trimmed a bit differently, so there's more at the beginning.
Every time he comes on stage or they turn to him, I'm like, Joe, can you get it out? Let's get the words out, Joe. You kind of feel bad for him.
How do you think it makes little kids with stutters feel when they see you make a comment like that?
What kind of a response is that? I can't get over that. She's like, I kind of feel bad for Joe Biden because he has such a hard time getting the words out. And Jake Tapper's like, how do you think it makes little children with stutters feel when you say things about that? Say things like that. Well, I don't think little kids who tend to make fun of each other really care too much about what you're saying about Joe Biden's clear inability to speak coherently, unless adults are telling the kids that it should be offensive to them. I mean, I get if you're just mocking the guy ruthlessly, if you're just mocking Joe Biden over some sort of speech impediment, or even his obvious decline. But what she said in that clip was just an obvious observation. Her being more of a journalist than Jake Tapper. They want to act like they had to talk to 200 White House insiders to get the scoop enough to where they could publish this book. No, you're a journalist, dude. Should have figured out all of this long before the rest of us. But no. Here was newly elected Senator Joe Biden in 1972 at age 30 with no stutter.
The youngest new face in the U.S. Senate next year will be that of Democrat Joseph Biden of Delaware.
Courtesy of ABC
so young,
News.
in fact, that at the time of his election on November 7th, Biden was not yet old enough to serve. Yesterday, that problem was resolved. ABC Capitol Hill correspondent Bob Clark has the story.
They gave a surprise party yesterday for Joe Biden, who will make history because of his age when he takes his seat in the new Senate. The boyish-looking father of 3 young children was celebrating his 30th birthday. That makes him just old enough to be a United States Senator, 30 being the minimum age prescribed by the Constitution. Biden, a liberal Democrat, pulled one of the big upsets of the election by unseating a 63-year-old Republican, Caleb Boggs. In Washington today, he was having trouble convincing some people he really is a senator and having some doubts about the Senate seniority system while hoping older members won't hold his age against him.
I expect these fellows are going to eventually judge me on my merit, not on my age, and I have to establish that merit, assuming there is any there.
Funny how this guy's been in politics so long. He was talking about how he has overcome age in both the young and the old context. When he was young, he was so young that he was saying, hey, I'm not too young. And when he was old, he was so old that he was saying, I'm not too old. But have you noticed a stutter? No.
I don't think it's going to be much of a problem. Beyond having other senators' staffs think I'm applying for a job or as a page or something.
Would you like to see some changes in the seniority system?
Well, I would like to see some changes in the seniority system, but and it's not going to make any difference my saying this, but it's not because I'm 30 and coming in. I think that the seniority system has many more drawbacks than it has merits. Where I'm not going to lead any move to change that in my formative years in the Senate, but were there to be such a vote to come up, I clearly would vote to eliminate the seniority system.
The indications are that you may be 100th in seniority, the last man on the totem pole in the Senate. Does that bother you?
Well, no, it doesn't. As a matter of fact, I think it's sort of amusing that I probably have the least seniority of anyone ever to enter this august body.
Biden worked in a borrowed office today, holding interviews, sorting through 1,400 job applications from people who want to work on his Senate staff. If he stays in the Senate till the end of this century, he'll be 57, the average age of senators now.
By the way,
Bob Clark, ABC News, Washington.
And not a single stutter there. I'm not saying that's proof that he never had a stutter. He very well may have had a stutter as a child. But for his entire adult life, until he's so old that he was declining cognitively, there was nothing in the form of a stutter. At least not worth mentioning. Not worth clutching pearls over, Jake Tapper. But yeah, no stutter back then in 1972. Let me just make one other point while I'm at it. There used to be this narrative, Donald Trump, draft dodger, because of bone spurs, which may or may not have been legitimate when he was a youngster. What you don't hear is that Joe Biden technically dodged the draft even more times than Donald Trump did. Look it up. He got out of it one more time than Donald Trump did. Several times. And I think it was because of, asthma or something like that. I believe that's what I read. Asthma. Correct me if I'm wrong on that as well. Which I always found a bit hard to believe, I guess, because Joe Biden was also an athlete. He considered himself an athlete. He played football and stuff like that. So, I just think that if you're going to call Donald Trump a draft dodger, there's at least as much reason to call Joe Biden a draft dodger. But that's a narrative that never caught on. Here was Senator Joe Biden insulting a reporter who asked about his education level in 1988, and this may have actually been 1987, after announcing his run for president for the first time, with no stutter. By the way, Biden also lied about his education level. Yeah. Because he was both a plagiarist and a liar at the time.
Question. What law school did you attend, and where did you place in that class? And the other question is, could you quickly, I think we all
I think I probably have a much higher IQ than you do, I suspect. I went to law school on a full academic scholarship, the only one in my class to have a full academic scholarship. In the first year in law school, I decided I didn't want to be in law school and ended up in the bottom two-thirds of my class, and then decided I wanted to stay, went back to law school, and in fact ended up in the top half of my class. I won the International Moot Court competition. I was the outstanding student in the political science department at the end of my year. I graduated with 3 degrees from undergraduate school and 165 credits, only need 123 credits, and I'd be delighted to sit down and compare my IQ to yours if you'd like, Frank.
If I could say one thing, I think just in my own opinion, I'm not questioning your IQ at all. I'm just saying that with the people that we have elected to office in recent years, I think that we have to question their credentials very solidly.
Well, I think you're right, Frank. But you know what I find kind of interesting? It seems to me if you can speak, you're at a liability in the Democratic Party anymore. It seems to me you've all become heartless technocrats. It seems to me that you forget that what happens is we have never as a party moved this nation by 14-point position papers and 9-point programs. It seems to me that when we got involved in the civil rights movement, Frank, nobody asked Martin Luther King what his legislative agenda was. He marched to change attitudes. When the women's movement started, it did not move with a constitutional amendment. They marched to change attitudes. And this party better understand full well that it's about time we change our attitude and we begin to change the attitudes of Americans about what their responsibilities are to the poor, about what their responsibilities are to other people, and about what our responsibility in the world is. And that requires changing attitudes. But Frank, I promise you, you'll see my 15-point plans and 19-point position papers, and you'll be able to make a judgment when Gary Hart and I stand there. Who knows more about foreign policy, Gary or me? And when you see that Dick Gebhardt and I stand there, you'll be able to make a judgment whether Dick Gebhardt or I know more about economic policy. But ultimately, Frank, this country needs a leader, and leaders change attitudes about people. And it's the ironic twist that in the wake of Ronald Reagan, that the only one thing he knew how to do was the one thing that is now being the currency of which is in fact being devalued so much. But
So, see the date up there in the corner in 1988. I believe this was actually 1987 because he dropped out of the race by September of 1987, so maybe the date up here is just in reference to the fact that the election itself was going to be in 1988. Road to the White House, old clip from C-SPAN. Joe Biden was insulting the IQ of a reporter there, getting in a bit of a tiff. Very high on himself at that point. He was lying about his education level, literally. They got exposed later on. He mentioned the civil rights movement. He also took some heat on that at a certain point because he misled people on his involvement in the civil rights movement. He led people to believe he was out marching and stuff, but he was not. So yeah, just not exactly an honest broker. Never really was, but once again, you noticed not a single stutter throughout the entirety of that. I guess Joe Biden had never ran any of that by Jake Tapper when Jake Tapper was claiming that, oh, it was just offensive to children if you suggested that Joe Biden was in decline. Yeah, Laura Trump was like, I think he's declining. Jake Tapper's like, you're mocking his stutter. Oh. Such propaganda. In this video, you see Joe Biden talking at age 45 in 1988, possibly the very end of 1987, about dropping out of his first run for president. Once again, you'll notice that he had no stutter. I might play part of this. I'm going to run out of time here. Almost 40 minutes into this.
There's no sour grapes about this. No one ever said it was easy to get to become the leader of the free world.
Well, Joe Biden is with us now. Do you feel as if you were stuffed by those clips?
I'm not sure how you use the phrase stuffed here in Great Britain, but I don't think they tell the full story. For example, that end of that, the beginning and end of the quote with regard to Kennedy was, I said, as President Kennedy said on foreign policy, we should say on economic policy, and I applied it to economic policy, but the way the clip runs, it makes it look like I was doing something differently. But that's all past.
Okay. So there he's talking about his plagiarism, implying that he was cut off, that he did appropriately cite Kennedy, but I did see in another clip where he was saying he didn't know that the quote was from Kennedy. So maybe he's lying about that as well, like lying about his lie, lying about his plagiarism. He gave multiple answers, different answers to the same question about him quoting someone without citing them. I'm not going to play the rest of that, but you can find that. That's on ITN Archive. Joe Biden ends his first presidential campaign in 1988. See, 1988 is on everything, even though he ended his campaign in 1987. It was short-lived, in large part because of the plagiarism scandal. For your information, here's a video which was published by the New York Times in 2019 about why Joe Biden had dropped out of his first run for president back in 1988. And I will clarify these dates. I keep clarifying that it could have been 1987, but I didn't realize that until after I had posted some of this. You'll, of course, notice the lack of honesty on Biden's part, as well as no stutter. That's what all of these clips have in common. Regardless of what story Joe Biden is telling, there's no stutter. That much is true. I'll play just a little bit of this one as well.
The next president of the United States, Joe Biden.
It's June 9th, 1987, and then Senator Joseph R. Biden Jr. has just entered the presidential race. Look familiar? The 2020 race is Biden's third attempt at the Oval Office. He first ran for president 32 years ago. For those who may have forgotten or weren't around in 87, here's what happened. Biden started off as a strong contender.
Senator Joseph R. Biden Jr. of Delaware.
But his campaign was marred by some early blunders, like this one.
What law school did you attend, and where did you place in that class? And the other question is...
I think I probably have a much higher IQ than you do, I suspect.
And he exaggerated his academic record in law school.
Went back to law school, and in fact ended up in the top half of my class.
And then there were moments like this, repeated later during the campaign.
When I marched in the civil rights movement, I marched with tens of thousands of others to change attitudes.
But he never actually marched in the civil rights movement at all. Ultimately, it was accusations of plagiarism in his speeches.
I did not know that was a Robert Kennedy quote. My mistake.
Oh. Did not know that was Robert Kennedy quote. So, assuming you're talking about the same quote in that other clip, you implied that you did know it was a Kennedy quote, and that you did actually cite it, and that you citing it was just cropped, left out of context. That one's up for debate, but I'm just saying it seems like he's talking about the same scandalous example of plagiarism, and he's giving two different responses. On the one hand, I knew. On the other hand, I didn't know. Take that for what you will. But yes, this was published by the New York Times in 2019, when Joe Biden was running for president and was one of various candidates at that time. Once he became the nominee, the official nominee for the Democrat Party, New York Times and other liberal newspapers and networks went silent on such things, and they heaped endless praise on him instead, because he was their chosen man at that point. But yeah, 2019 would have been a while before the actual election, early on in his campaign.
That forced him to drop out of the race.
I made some mistakes.
Yeah, see the date up there in the corner? Made some mistakes. At least he acknowledged that much. September 23 of 1987.
After that, Biden stayed in the Senate, ran again in the 2008 race, became the vice presidential nominee, and then the vice president. Laid low for a little while, and now we're here.
If I'm going to be able to beat Donald Trump in 2020, it's going to happen here.
And certain things, including a handful of Biden's vulnerabilities, haven't changed. He's still leaning into some of the core messages he highlighted during his first presidential run.
Okay, forget the rest of that. Moving this on. A few thoughts here. But I do have another clip, and this one is especially interesting.
He said, well, the side of the brain that the first aneurysm is on controls your ability to speak.
So in June 3 of 2020, make that 2013. Getting ahead of myself. June 3 of 2013, Joe Biden was speaking about his 2 brain aneurysms and brain surgeries that he had had, and about how his surgeon had told him after the first aneurysm that the aneurysm had affected the portion of his brain that controls his speaking. That's right. Haven't really heard him talk about that since. So let me just read my caption about that. And let me specify the last couple of posts in this thread. Joe Biden announced his first run for president in June of 1987 and was forced to drop out of the race by September of 1987. Obviously, he didn't make it to Election Day, which was in 1988. So, in regards to the clip I just played a little portion of, here was Joe Biden in 2013 talking about how he was told that his first aneurysm back in February of 1988, shortly after he dropped out of that race, affected the portion of his brain which controls ability to speak. I'm not saying that his aneurysms and or brain surgeries had anything to do with the alleged reemergence of his childhood stutter, but what I have noticed is that Biden quit telling that part of the story once he ran for president in the 2020 election. When Biden's stuttering became a convenient talking point in his campaign, or shall I say a convenient excuse for his incoherence, neither he nor his party would admit to any potential lingering brain injuries, since that would have clearly given more reason to believe that he was dealing with declining cognitively. He most certainly may have suffered from a stutter as a child, but judging by years of him speaking fluently, though stupidly, in the Senate, what we have seen from him in the past few years especially has nothing to do with a stutter, other than the literal decline-induced stuttering of his brain. Jake Tapper and the rest of MSM were lying to us, or at least to themselves, and therefore misleading us. I could play the rest of this.
I had 2 cranial aneurysms, and they literally had to take the top of my head off. I mean, they take a saw and they cut your head off and go in to find the artery that is, one was leaking, the other that hadn't before it burst. It was a long road to the operating room. I said, it's an absolutely true story. I said, what are my chances of getting off this table and being completely normal? He said, well, your chances of living are a lot better. What's the most likely thing that will happen if I live? But what he said, well, the side of the brain that the first aneurysm is on controls your ability to speak. And I thought, why the hell didn't they tell me this before the '88 campaign? It could have saved us all a lot of trouble. You know what I mean?
Okay. So, what's the joke there? Especially considering your aneurysms were after? I'm not really sure what he meant by that. It's a joke of some sort, and people laughed, but I don't really know what it meant.
Now I'm going down the second operation, 4 months later, and because it's on the other side of my head. And this is not about me, but it's about the truth. They put together the same crew. As you know, they always want the same anesthesiologist, the same team if they've done an operation on you. And he's the anesthesiologist, and I'm going down. Now, this operation had a 98% chance because it hadn't bled at all. They told me this was going to. And so, trying to make me feel better, the doc, kidding the neurosurgeon, looked at me and he said, looked down at me and said, Senator, do you know why neurosurgeons have the biggest egos in medicine? I said, no, I don't know. He said, who in the hell else would go into the brain with such confidence knowing as little as they know about it? And I thought about that for a second and decided to stop thinking about it. But all kidding aside, there's so much we don't know. So much we don't know.
Even there, in 2013, Joe Biden was speaking rather fluently.
He said, well, the side of the brain that the first aneurysm is on controls your ability to speak.
So yeah, in case you've never heard that clip, a lot of people probably haven't. I heard it several years ago, and it kind of has been in my mind throughout all of his so-called stutters ever since. Just wondering if those aneurysms affected his ability to speak, or brought back some childhood stuttering. Same, but different. An actual decline. Cognitive decline. Yeah, I think that first aneurysm was in February of 1988, and the second one was in May of 1988. Something like that. All right, so I mentioned this earlier. Joe Biden told Axios in 2019 that his childhood stuttering was a thing of the past and that his mistakes weren't due to stuttering. Meanwhile, we were gaslit all through his campaigning and presidency to believe that all of his endless gaffes were a result of simple stuttering. Jake Tapper, you played along as it was convenient for you, but now you want to make money off of a book by claiming to reveal the very truth which you were actively suppressing.
The Atlantic recently published a powerful piece about your childhood stutter. The author says he was stuttering at age 4, and he writes after interviewing you, I've been following practically everything he's said for months now, and sometimes what is characterized as a memory lapse is indeed a stutter. Mr. Vice President, do you feel that?
I don't think of myself as continuing to stutter.
Then why did you go along with a whole bunch of campaign stunts centered around your stuttering?
That doesn't cross my mind that I'm stuttering, but apparently people will say occasionally, particularly when I'm tired, I'll say, and I'll find myself searching for a second. Look, the mistakes I make are mistakes, and some people think I still stutter. I don't think of myself that way.
Well, I guess Joe Biden did not give that memo to Jake Tapper, did he?
What I remember about my stutter was how debilitating it was and how humiliating it was. But I remember stuttering when I had to speak publicly, when I had to stand up and read, when I had to, and it was mortifying. But it turned out, and I mean this sincerely, maybe the best thing ever happened to me. Because it gave me an insight that I don't know that it would ever had before, that everybody has something that is not something they're able to overcome just by saying, I'm not going to do that.
So in and of itself, that's fairly inspirational. Nothing wrong with that, but in context with everything else that we've taken into consideration here in this show, this podcast, this whatever you want to call it, I'm not saying he himself generated or created all of these narratives, but he went along with a lot of them, and he basically became the poster child for stuttering. But yeah, did you notice how from 2013 to 2019, you could already tell he was slowing down. He was already declining. But that's what happens. A natural trajectory of life and ultimately death. He's not immortal. Immoral, yes. Immortal, no. This was just one of the videos that Joe Biden's campaign put out back in 2020, using a stuttering kid and the fact that Biden once may have had a stutter 70 years ago or so. Well, give or take. To appeal to modern emotions. That's what these were. They were appeals to emotions. I have no problem with a politician connecting with stuttering kids, but the connection was abused in Biden's case precisely to hide his own personal mental/physical decline. Biden might not have done the heavy lifting to create the false narrative, but he certainly played along with it.
All right.
Joe, it's me, Braden. I just want to let you know that the Harrington family is rooting for you and that we wish you good luck. When I first met you, I was holding in all that fear and feelings about my stutter, and it was really good to let that out to you, to somebody who I felt a connection with and to somebody who's stutters. There's about a month left till the election, and you know you can do it.
How is this old man supposed to have this personal connection with this kid? Because Biden had a stutter of his own, supposedly, back in the ages of the dinosaur, like 60 years ago. I guess. I don't know. I just feel like if some 80-year-old came up to me and was like, I once upon a time, years ago, went through what you're going through now. Like, well, okay, that's cool. It's hero treatment. It doesn't really seem deserved. Now, I'm not questioning the credibility of this kid, but he did catch quite a bit of clout off of this. If you look up his name, Braden, can't remember his last name, but if you look him up, a lot of interviews. He has some books published as well, mostly around the 2020 election, conveniently, because he was in the political circles. There was actually a kid that was brought to the DNC before the 2020 election, Democrat National Convention, and they did a presentation there as well. It may have been the same kid, but they appealed to emotion through stuttering. And it just seemed really phony to me. It seemed like Joe Biden was either using or going along with the party's desire to use this kid to pander. The only time Joe Biden stutters, like actually stutters, but not actually, is when he's intentionally imitating the stutter of a child. Ironically, the rest of his gaffes are due to him decaying before our very eyes. Speaking of the 2020 election, this was during that cycle. One of the debates, he did this.
My wife and I have a call list of somewhere between 20 and 100 people that we call at least every week or every month to tell them I'm here. I give them my private phone number. They keep in touch with me. The little kid who says, I can't talk. What do I do? I have scores of these young women and men who I keep in contact with.
I feel like when someone has to force a stutter, it's probably because they don't actually have a stutter. Like, he got through the rest of that sentence fine until he is trying to imitate a stutter. Then he's suddenly stuttering. You have to imitate it because you don't actually stutter yourself. Maybe you did once upon a time, but you don't anymore. They just brought back the narrative and ran with it hard in the paint to try to excuse any of his gaffes in the lead up to the 2020 election especially. That's when they really brought this stuttering talking point to life. That much should have been obvious all along, and Jake Tapper was a propagandist to proclaim otherwise. Yeah. And by the way, in that particular election cycle was when Joe Biden really started to decline, the 2020 election cycle. So this notion that it was shocking how he performed on the debate stage against Donald Trump. Listen, he performed pretty poorly in their first couple of battles in the 2020 election cycle. They debated each other then. Fortunately for Joe Biden, though, Donald Trump would not shut up long enough to allow Joe Biden to stumble and fall into the abyss. Whether you call it a stutter or a stammer or whatever you want to call it, Donald Trump kind of was his own worst enemy in those first debates. That moment when reality slapped CNN in the face and they suddenly realized Joe Biden's decline, well, it was already obvious, but they were complicit in the cover-up until it ceased to be convenient. Here's an edit I put together after that poor debate performance by Joe Biden, July 11 of 2024. That's at least when I uploaded this.
So it's your help that I seek first. As today, I announce my candidacy for President of the United States of America.
That was him announcing for the first time back in the 80s that he was running for president. And did I forget to mention that he made 30 look like the new 50. He made 40 look like the new 60. He made so on and so forth.
2,000 years later.
This election is about character. Yep. So you have two choices. You have my husband, Joe, who you all know, who has integrity. He's strong. He's steady. He's a leader. He's smart. He's energetic. Or you have chaos.
That's right.
Yes, or you have chaos.
Right.
But I think the American people deserve a debate because you need to see your choices. You need to see Trump, and you need to see the president, and you need to see the differences. And my husband's, and you're going to see how smart he is and the experience he has.
We didn't.
And then you'll see somebody who, like you're saying, I'm going to use Joy's words, can't put a sentence together, and everything is beautiful and it's wonderful.
Tremendous.
Big league. Yeah,
Tremendous.
Yeah.
This was just before the debate, which did Joe Biden in. Joe Biden was claiming that Donald Trump, according to Joy Behar, could not put two sentences together.
So I think the American people deserve to see the two men who are running for this office because your choice is going to be clear.
The president and former president making their way off the CNN debate stage. Looks like Jill Biden, the first lady, has come out. Former President Trump walking off the stage. The first debate of the 2024 campaign and the earliest presidential debate ever now in the books and in front of the voters. Tonight, along with Aaron Burnett, the first word on what those voters might make of it from our political professionals, from our CNN Flash Poll and Swing State Focus Group. We'll be talking to surrogates, including Vice President Harris, getting fact checks from our Daniel Dale and new reporting from inside both campaigns. With me here, CNN political commentator Scott Jennings, Kate Bedingfield, David Urban, Van Jones, Alyssa Farrar Griffin, and Newsnight anchor Abby Phillip and David Axelrod. and CNN Chief National Correspondent John King. John, let me start with you. Your thoughts.
Anderson, this was a game-changing debate in the sense that right now, as we speak, there is a deep, a wide, and a very aggressive panic in the Democratic Party.
Panic. It was more of a panic than a shock, because that's the moment they knew they were going to lose. It wasn't really about them being shocked at his state of decline. No. They were afraid that they were going to lose the election, and they ultimately did.
And just to co-sign what John is saying, I mean, the panic that I am hearing from Democrats is not like anything that I have heard in this campaign so far.
Look, I can't argue with either of them about how Democratic leaders are reacting to this poll.
Listen, if anybody in America thinks that was even close to being an okay debate by Joe Biden, I'm living in a parallel universe. That was an unmitigated disaster for President Biden from the second he walked out to the closing statement.
Yeah, look, it was a really disappointing debate performance from Joe Biden. I don't think there's any other way to slice it. His biggest issue that he had to prove to the American people was that he had the energy, he had the stamina, and he didn't do that.
That was painful. I love Joe Biden. I work for Joe Biden. He didn't do well at all. He did not do well at all.
I think Joe Biden lost in the first 3 minutes. I think a lot of voters probably tuned out, and millions of people are having conversations with their families, with their friends, of if the president is up to the task and if he should step aside.
I don't think there's any other way to put it. This was clearly a person who was diminished from where he was on the debate stage 4 years ago. I think for a lot of Americans who don't follow politics closely, they saw that and they were shocked.
They started covering the truth only when it ceased to be convenient to cover up the truth. They couldn't hide it any longer. So they pretended that they exposed it. Just as Jake Tapper is now in his new book, obviously.
But what accounts for someone with so much experience doing so much preparation and this being the outcome?
Honestly, I think the question answers itself. He wasn't capable of doing any better than he did.
Joe, you did such a great job. You answered every question. You knew all the facts.
He doesn't even look like he believed it. But she was gaslighting everyone.
And let me ask the crowd, what did Trump do? Why?
Like you just did. And saying he did a good job.
It was a bad episode. No indication of any serious condition. I was exhausted. I didn't listen to my instincts in terms of preparing, and I had a bad night.
Okay, so you get it. I do have one more video here. I'm over an hour into this. I did not plan to go on this long, but I knew I had a lot to get to and go through. Behold Biden's disastrous debate performance, when talking heads like Jake Tapper could no longer pretend that he was suffering from a simple stutter. That's what all of this comes down to. This is actually 11 minutes long. I don't think I can get through all of this.
E40. Go stupid, go dumb, go stupid, go dumb, go dumb. Come on, tell me when to go, tell me when to go, tell me when to go, tell me when to go. Hey, can we get this started? Come on, can we get this started? God bless America. Fat Joe. I'm all the way up. Way up.
Let's hear it for Fat Joe and E40. So it's great to be with you all. So
this was just after the other clip with Jill Biden, claiming that Joe Biden did a great job. This shortly after she's got this very, very vivid vote attire on. And she's leading this event because she kind of took front and center after this to try to keep the propaganda campaign rolling, because she obviously could see that he had crumbled on the debate stage, but she wasn't about to admit that. She wasn't about to let go of the power. She was still power tripping.
some of you may have heard the story that I didn't agree to marry Joe until the 5th time he asked me. But the truth is, I loved him from the start.
He just looks like a shell of himself back there. I would have agreed all along that it was elder abuse if not for the fact that third time running for him, he finally got exactly what he wanted. He asked for everything that came his way, and ultimately the epic fail of it all.
So I'm going to repeat that line because I think it's the most important. I loved him from the start. I saw in him then the same character that I see in him today. And even though he has faced unimaginable tragedies, his optimism is undaunted. His strength is unshakable. His hope is undeterred.
And remember, at this point, they went on for weeks claiming that he definitely wasn't going to drop out of the race, that he was going to win it.
And over the last few years, Joe has helped heal our country, helping us all recover from the chaos of the last administration.
Then he got sick with COVID, supposedly went away for a couple of days, announced that he was not going to be the next president, that he was going to be dropping out of the race. Kamala Harris took his place, and ever since then, Joe Biden has been claiming that he still believed that he could have won, even though he dropped out, meaning he was forced out by the Democrat Party, who had been covering for him for so long. Or shall I say covering up for him.
If you take a look at all that was done in his administration, he didn't do much at all. By the time he left, things were in chaos, literally chaos.
We don't choose our chapter in history, but we can choose who leads us through it. And at this moment, with these perils the world is facing, there is no one that I would rather have sitting in the Oval Office right now than my husband.
The idea. I can't think of a single major leader in the world who wouldn't trade places with the job I've done and what they've done.
Eric, thank you for all that you do for your fellow educators and students, your family, and your community. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome to the stage, Eric Fitz.
I'm just working the playback speed here.
Last night, I watched with pride as President Biden won the debate.
Stop it. Get some help.
And put forward. He put forward a clear vision for making life better for our families.
By the way, the Border Patrol endorsed my position. In addition to that, we found ourselves in a situation where when he was president, he was separating babies from their mothers, putting them in cages, making sure the families were separated. That's not the right way to go. What I've done since I've changed the law, what's happened? I've changed it in a way that now you're in a situation where there are 40% fewer people coming across the border illegally. That's better than when he left office. And I'm going to continue to move until we get the total ban on the total initiative relative to what we're going to do with more Border Patrol and more asylum officers.
President Trump?
I really don't know what he said at the end of that sentence. I don't think he knows what he said either. Look.
Oof. Burn. I think Joe Biden got burnt out on debate prep. They worked him too hard and it didn't work out.
I'm proud Joe Biden is our president.
Putin, because he had called a veteran who had given their lives in the country in World War I and refused to go to the grave sites. He called them suckers and losers. Donald Trump isn't just a convicted felon. Donald Trump is a one-man crime wave. And he's got more trials. Look. Debate as well as I used to. But I know what I do know. I know how to tell the truth.
Look, I'd be happy to have a driving contest with him. I got my handicap, which when I was vice president, down to a 6. But by the way, I told you before, I'm happy to play golf with you if you carry your own bag. Think you can do it?
That's the biggest lie. He's a 6 handicap of all.
I was an 8 handicap.
Yeah.
8.
Never.
But I had, you know how many?
I've seen you swing. I know you swing.
By the way, I think Joe Biden was close to a 6 at one point for a short amount of time. His handicap. But then Donald Trump questioned it because it sounded so ridiculous, and then Joe Biden changed the number because he wasn't even sure what he was talking about.
I know right from wrong. And I know how to do this job. I know how to get things done. And I know, like millions of Americans know, when you get knocked down, you get back up.
Well, first of all, I spent half my career being criticized as being the youngest person in politics. I was the second youngest person ever elected to the United States Senate, and now I'm the oldest. This guy's 3 years younger and a lot less competent.
And I know it'll take to keep the world safe and free for the years ahead. Folks, I give you my word as a Biden, I would not be running again if I didn't believe with all my heart and soul I can do this job. Because quite frankly, the stakes are too high. The stakes are too high. Donald Trump is a genuine threat to this nation. He's a threat to our freedom. He's a threat to our democracy. He's literally a threat for everything America stands for. The choice in this election is simple. Donald Trump will destroy our democracy. I will defend it. She finally did marry me.
We're going to begin with you, President Biden. You have 2 minutes.
Joe Biden couldn't defend a fence post.
We've made significant progress from the debacle that was left by President Trump in his last term. We find ourselves in a situation where, number one, we have to make sure that we have a fair tax system. I ask anyone out there in the audience or anyone out watching this debate, do you think the tax system is fair? The fact is that I said nobody even making under $400,000 had a single penny increase in their taxes and will not. And if I'm reelected, that'll be the case again. But this guy has increased your taxes because of the deficit, number one. He's increased inflation because of the debacle he left after the way he handled the pandemic. And he finds himself in a position where he now wants to tax you more by putting a 10% tariff on everything that comes into the United States of America. What I did, when, for example, he wants to get rid of the ability of Medicare for us to be able to negotiate drug prices with the big pharma companies. Well, guess what? We got it down to $35 for insulin instead of $400. No more than $2,000 for every senior, no matter how much prescription they need. You know what that did? That reduced the federal debt by $160 billion over 10 years because the government doesn't have to pay the exorbitant prices. I'm going to make that available to every senior all along, it's happening now, and everybody in America. He wants to get rid of that. I'm going to make sure that we have child care. We're going to significantly increase the credits people have for child care. I'm going to make sure we do something about what we're doing on lead pipes and all the things that are causing health problems for people across the country. We're going to continue to fight to bring down inflation and give people a break.
I thought I'd let those play through. Those were his closing statements, more like closed casket statements. It was a wrap after that. I didn't actually play the most embarrassing clip from that debate, the one where he was like completely lost and then ended on, "We beat Medicare," or something like that. And then Donald Trump was like, "Yeah, you beat it to death." However that went. I didn't put that clip in that compilation. But yeah, back to the beginning. Original sin. President Biden's decline, its cover-up, and his disastrous choice to run again by Jake Tapper and Alex Thompson. Get you a copy. Or don't. I wouldn't recommend that you get it. But, your decision. Okay. Sorry I don't have a catchphrase at the end of all of that. I'm done for. It is now 4 o'clock in the morning. I got to go to work here shortly. A lot going on, too. But if you've made it through all of this, thank you very much. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Keep in touch. Keep it tuned. New content is coming soon. Peace